do you feel when you return to the home where you grew up? Maybe you go there every year for Christmas or Thanksgiving or for summer holidays. My father passed away a few years ago, but my mother still lives in the house that I grew up in from the age of 9 onwards. So when I go home, when I visit her, there's a feeling of comfort and familiarity and acceptance. The house is in the Seattle area on Lake Washington, and there's the rocky beach where my brother and I went swimming. There's the 2 big, huge maple trees on the lawn that I always laid underneath with the dog lying beside me and reading my book. There's the room I slept in. There's the dock we went water skiing off of. And going back there is returning to my father's house. In fact, there is another house that kind of has, for me, a feeling of going home, and it's a house in Oregon. It used to sit in the middle of a big, huge tract of farmland, although now most of the land around it has been sold and there are houses being built on it. The farm was originally owned by my great-grandfather, and he raised his family there. My grandfather was the oldest son, and so when he married, he built this little house right across the farm road from his parents, where he took my grandmother when they got married. My mother was born in that house. My aunt lives in it today, and it's been extensively renovated, but the last time I was there, I slept in the bedroom that my grandparents slept in when I was a little girl. And I used to, as a child, sleep in the same room that my mother slept in. There is a feeling of going home when I go there, even though I've never lived in that house. We're taking a week out of the book of Revelation to do a lesson on heaven. Heaven is our Father's house. It's where we're going. And since it's our family, it's where our family is, our Father is, it is home. There are some people in the Bible who visited heaven and tried to describe it for us, but they didn't do a very good job. You know, if I went back to, even if I don't go back, if I wanted to, I could sit down and draw for you a floor plan of the house in Lake Washington where my mother lives. I could tell you what color the walls are in all the rooms and what the curtains are like on the windows and what it looked like when I was a kid. I could even draw the little farmhouse before it was renovated in Oregon that I used to visit as a child. But I can't tell you what heaven looks like because I've never been there. It's a home I've never visited. And the people in the Bible who have seen heaven have not done a good job of describing it to us. For example, Isaiah had a look at heaven, which he describes in chapter 6, verses 1 to 4. And he talks about the angels shouting, "Holy, holy, holy," and the train of God filling the temple. And he spends 2 verses describing the seraph, but not much else. And then here is this description of by John in Revelation 4, and he talks about various living creatures and the elders, and again, the shouts of "Holy, holy," and the rainbow around the throne, but that's about it. Doesn't tell us much about heaven. It does a little bit better in chapters 21 and 22, where he has described streets of gold and walls of jasper and gates of pearls, foundations of gemstones, and he told us about the river of water that flows from the throne of God. But still, we have questions, and he doesn't give as many details as we would like. It seems that words just simply seem to fail those who see heaven. They can only describe a little bit. No language seems to be enough to give us a real sense of what our Father's house is like. It's a wonderful place, but beyond description. 1 Corinthians 2 verse 9 says, "No eye has seen, no ear heard, no mind has conceived what God has prepared for those who love him." But there are some things we do know about our Father's house. First of all, it is a prepared place. And I'm going to read to you from John 14, verses 1 to 3. "Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, I would have told you that If that were not so, would I have told you that I'm going to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am." Now, when I go home to my parents' place, someone has usually prepared for us. The beds are made. My mother has cooked a meal that she knows we're going to like. Sometimes my brother and his wife have come over to share that first meal with us. And if I tell my mother a time which we expect to be there, she starts looking out the window about 45 minutes before that. And if we're even 10 minutes past the time that I told her we might be there, as soon as she opens the door, she says, "Finally, I thought something had happened to you." We're expected. God made a world, the world we live in just 6 days. In this world, there are over 100 kinds of roses, 340 distinct dog breeds, and over 80,000 edible vegetables. All that in just 6 days. The home he's preparing has been in process for 2,000 years. Imagine how wonderful it will be if he made all we can see in just 6 days. And when it's ready, he'll come get us and take us to be with him. What else does God tell us about this home? Well, it is our inheritance. Matthew 25:34 says, "Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you before the foundation of the world.'" Parents do not need to leave their estate to their children. It's up to them. They can leave it to a home for mangy cats if they wish to. And to top it off, we are adopted children, those who do not deserve by any inherent right to be a part of God's family. We are the undeserving ones that he took in. We get this home as a result of his kindness and grace. 2 Corinthians 5:8 tells us that heaven will be our new home from the instant we die. It says, "We are confident, I say, and would prefer to be absent from the body and at home with the Lord." As soon as life is done and our souls are absent from our bodies, we will be at home in our Father's house. We will be where Jesus is. Jesus went back to heaven after he rose from the dead, and so that is where we will be. I do want to clarify something that has come up from the last couple of lessons. Today, if a believer dies, they go to heaven, but this is not considered a resurrection. Resurrection is always physical. Going to heaven when you die is the condition of the soul of the believer. It is a conscious existence with God, but not a physical one. The physical resurrection will come, but it hasn't happened yet. And all believers will be physically raised from the dead, their bodies, and reunited with their souls, and they will live physically in heaven with God forever. But today, it is a matter of the soul going to heaven. The new heaven and the new earth, however, are a physical place in which people will live in physical resurrected bodies. Matthew 22:31-32 tells us something else about our Father's house. It's a place of life. That verse says, it speaks of the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. And it says that God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are still alive. Heaven is a place of life. When Jacob died, it says that he breathed his last and was gathered to his people. It has the idea of going to be with his family. He was not ceasing to exist. He was going to a place of life, a place where other members of his family already were, in the family of faith, and he was going to be with them. Heaven is also a place where earthly values do not apply. Think of gold, the most expensive and sought-after commodity on earth. It is the standard of our currency. We spend our lives seeking more money, more gold. We work for it, strive for it. Some people even die for it. But in heaven, the streets are paved with it. It's like asphalt. Of such abundance is used to pave streets. The values of heaven are just not the same as earth. The final thing you need to know about heaven is that it's our home because it's where our Father is. In fact, God himself is our home. Heaven is God's presence. It is our home because God, our Father, is there. Now, if my family home on Lake Washington were to be sold, and someday it will be, I might drive past it, but I would not go in. It would no longer be home. The house in Oregon is the place where my aunt still lives, and I visit a couple of times a year in normal years when COVID's not going on. And it is home because that is where my family lives. And that is true of heaven. It's where our Father is, and always has been, and always will be. A while ago, I heard a question originally asked by John Piper. I won't get the quote exactly right because I'm going off memory and I don't have it in writing, but it went something like this. If you could have heaven, if you could have the peace and the joy and all your pain gone, if you could have all of the other blessings about heaven, if you could have everyone you love there and all the things you love, even the foods you love, no tears, no night, if you could have all that, would you be happy if Jesus wasn't there? Now that question hits me. I too often focus on the secondary blessings of heaven, the peace and joy, the no pain, all of that. I forget that this is all about being with Jesus. God is my home. I think that the truth is that when we see him, we might be like those other people who tried to write about heaven and didn't do a very good job. We might be so overwhelmed with what Jesus is like, what God is like, that we will not even notice the other blessings of heaven. Though their blessings are wonderful that God has provided for us. But am I looking forward to them or to being with God? What are you most wanting? So if this is what heaven is like, what should life be like while we wait for it? How should our hope for our Father's house influence our life here and now? Now, we've talked about hope before. Hope is not wishful thinking. It's confident expectation of a certain future event or outcome. The word hope is used in a variety of ways in God's word. For example, Jeremiah 14:22 says, "Our hope is in you." It carries the idea of trust, of confident expectation. Isaiah 25:9 says, "Our God for whom we waited." The word waited is an English translation of a Hebrew word for hope. And it carries the idea of patient endurance, of remaining constant and confident in spite of circumstances. In the New Testament, there's only one Greek word for hope, but there are a number of ideas or concepts implied. Titus 2:13 speaks of waiting for the blessed hope and the glorious appearing of Jesus Christ. Hope implies actively watching for what is being expected. Romans 5:3-4 carries the idea of endurance. Trials lead to perseverance, and perseverance to hope. The New Testament always ties hope to the coming of Jesus. 1 John 3:2-3 says, for example, it speaks of knowing that we shall see him, and having this hope, we purify ourselves. Hope is tied to a person, to Jesus Christ, and always involves a call to action. Hope is dynamic. It's active. It's not a justification for idleness. In fact, very much the opposite. It calls us, in light of Jesus and his return, to purify ourselves and to loving obedience. We tend to be pretty inward-focused, self-focused. The more hopeless we feel, the more inward-focused we become. But hope in the return of Jesus and all that will bring to us allows us to put our troubles in perspective. We can therefore turn outward. We can see opportunities to live for Jesus and step into those opportunities. It's like the Christian woman who, in occupied Europe during World War II, encountered a Jewish woman fleeing from pursuing German soldiers. The believer traded her identification papers for the identification papers of the Jewish woman. The believer was caught, and because she had papers stating that she was a Jew, she was sent to a concentration camp where she eventually died in the gas chamber. But when she had given her papers to the Jewish woman, she told her about Jesus, and she told her that she was trading her life for the Jewish woman's life because Jesus had traded his life for hers. She was able to do this because of her hope and confidence in God. She believed she would be with Jesus when she died. She was confident where she was going, so she could be outward focused and seek to save the life of another and to point them to Jesus for salvation from sin. Hope reminds us that this isn't home. We're just passing through here. So it can keep us from putting down roots in this world, but it helps us live instead for the kingdom of God. Hope allows us to be confident that the troubles we are experiencing here are earning for us a weight of glory. It reminds us that there's meaning and purpose for our scars and pain. And someday, God will show us why. Hope helps us live in loving community with other believers here and to demonstrate the love of Jesus to others. The reality of our home in heaven inspires us to want to lay up treasure there, to be living in loving obedience and submission to the will of our Father, so that his kingdom will be advanced. The hope of heaven reorients our values to those of our Father. And our confident hope of heaven helps us face the final moments of life. Church history abounds with stories of people who have seen angels in the final moments of life, stories of people who sat up in bed and said, "Jesus, you've come for me." If we've got nothing else from Jesus but something that makes death easier to face, that would be wonderful, but we get so much more. In short, the truth about heaven gives us a reason for passionate, obedient living. Heaven is real. It's not a myth and not a fairy tale. It is our home where our Father is, the place we will live with him always, and going there is just the very beginning of the story. I'm sure many of you have read the Tale of Narnia series. It's an allegory of the Christian life. The physical life of the children is represented as being on the manor house side of the wardrobe, and their spiritual life on the Narnia side. And they live in both at the same time, and both are equally real. The last book of the series is called The Last Battle. And in the end of that book, in the life the children have on the old manor house side of the wardrobe, there is a railway accident and all 4 children are killed. It is Aslan who tells them the news that in the earthly world they have died. And this is how the book ends. And as he spoke, he no longer looked to them like a lion. But the things that began to happen after that were so great and beautiful that I cannot write them. And for us, this is the end of all the stories, but we can only truly say they all lived happily ever after. But for them, it was only the beginning of the real story. All their life in this world and all their adventures in Narnia had only been the cover and the title page. And now at last, they are beginning chapter 1 of the great story, which no one on earth has read, which goes on forever, in which every chapter is better than the one before. No eye has seen, no ear heard, no mind has conceived what God has prepared for those who love him. Heaven, our Father's home.